Freedom is sold as a bright banner, but the fine print is always missing. What you celebrate as liberty is often a set of permitted behaviors, carefully bounded and quietly enforced. Those boundaries are the invisible architecture most people never learn to see. People imagine control as blunt force, laws, soldiers, overt bans, but the modern craft is subtler. It designs preferences, channels attention, and dresses constraint as convenience. When control looks like comfort, resistance withers before it begins. Notice how choices multiply while outcomes converge. You can pick a brand, a candidate, or a lifestyle, yet the range of real possibility narrows toward the same scripted results. Choice becomes a theater prop, while the plot remains unchanged. Language does more than describe freedom. It shapes it. Reframing words like safety, efficiency, and inclusion can silently shrink what counts as acceptable dissent. When the vocabulary tightens, imagination is hemmed in by definition. Institutions breed habits. Schools, workplaces, and media teach rituals of compliance disguised as normal life. Habitual obedience becomes a civic virtue, and generations inherit a choreography of submission they never rehearsed for. Visibility is weaponized. Make some things hypervisible and others disappear. The public will fixate on the glare and miss the shadow where real design takes place. Attention is the currency of control. Spend it on spectacle and the infrastructure remains unexamined. Markets channel desire. Advertising does not sell products so much as identities. It engineers aspiration so that consumption becomes a civic duty. In that economy, freedom is measured by purchasing power, and dissent gets priced out. Surveillance has a soft face now. Convenience, personalized service, helpful recommendations. Each small exchange of data buys comfort and sells autonomy. The bargain is made in tiny clicks until the cost is irreversible. Social norms are the quiet police. Shame, praise, and ridicule enforce conformity more effectively than laws in many settings. Communities self-regulate because exclusion stings deeper than fines, and everyone learns to march in step. The architecture of control is layered. Law on top, culture below, habit at the base. Change any single layer and the structure still stands. Dismantle the habit and you begin to see the scaffolding that supported it. Habits are the quiet cement of control. Education often produces competence without independence. Young minds are trained to pass tests, not to dismantle systems. The result is a populace skilled at functioning within the machine rather than imagining a world beyond it. Metrics colonize meaning. When everything is measured, decisions are driven by scores and dashboards, not by judgment or ethical imagination. Metrics make life legible to managers and malleable to design. Freedom recedes behind KPIs. Crisis is the perfect laboratory. When societies panic, emergency measures proliferate and temporary controls calcify into permanence. The exceptional becomes the normal, and the public forgets it was ever different. Policing increasingly means preemption. Anticipate risk, intervene early, and normalize surveillance as prevention. That logic trades freedom for a forecasted security that often never materializes, while the preemption infrastructure grows unchecked. Public discourse is curated. Algorithms prioritize engagement over truth, outrage over nuance, and speed over depth. The attention economy converts civic conversation into spectacle, and spectacle is poor soil for serious dissent. Reputation systems make behavior legible and manipulable. Ratings, reviews, and social scores channel incentive structures that reward compliance and penalize unpredictability. Reputation becomes a governance mechanism far more flexible than law. The cleverness of modern control is that it co-opts language of liberation. Empowerment programs, skills training, and participatory platforms sound emancipatory while recalibrating citizens into more efficient nodes of the system. Liberation is repackaged as optimization. Networks replace hierarchies, and networks are easier to hide. Public-private clusters coordinate policy, investment, and messaging across borders with minimal democratic oversight. Power migrates into webs that are legible to insiders and opaque to everyone else. Historical memory is curated to stabilize consent. Certain pasts are amplified, others erased. The archive is a political instrument that shapes what people imagine as possible or moral. Memory curated is consent manufactured. The culture industry manufactures desire and numbs critique. Entertainment normalizes policy possibilities long before they are legislated, rehearsing publics to accept futures they never voted on. Fiction becomes a testing ground for real-world redesign. Work is reconceived as perpetual optimization. The rhetoric of hustle masks structural extraction. Flexibility becomes a euphemism for precarity. Autonomy is reframed as entrepreneurial risk, shifting responsibility from institutions to individuals. Philanthropy buys influence and legitimacy. Large donors fund research, shape curricula, and brand extraction as generosity. When wealth rewrites the agenda of inquiry, the public's capacity to question shrinks. Charity becomes a soft architecture of power. Expertise is gate-kept. Credentials and credentialing bodies decide which narratives count, effectively marginalizing alternative knowledges. When only officially sanctioned evidence matters, dissent becomes easy to delegitimize. Markets create scarcity where none naturally exists. Controlled scarcity of housing, education, or access manufactures compliance. When survival is precarious, rebellion becomes too costly for most. Scarcity is a lever of governance. The veneer of participation masks real exclusion. Consultations, panels, and surveys give an appearance of voice while decisions remain within closed loops. Participation is often performative, and performance pacifies. Legal design normalizes control by embedding it in routines. Data retention rules, compliance frameworks, and administrative burdens steer behavior more gently but more persistently than blunt prohibition. Regulation becomes the new architecture. Language of rights is repurposed into rights as privileges that can be suspended in the name of safety or efficiency. Framing rights as conditional turns freedom into something granted and revocable, not inherent. The grammar of liberty changes the reality of it. The psychological infrastructure matters. Teach people to fear unpredictability, to seek security in protocol, and to equate novelty with danger. You will produce a population that prefers managed comfort to bold freedom. The inner life of fear stabilizes external control. Communities atomize when mobility and platformization replace stable local ties. Atomized citizens are easier to govern remotely. Solidarity is diluted into transactional networks that do not sustain collective power. Fragmentation feeds design. Resistance is anticipated and neutralized by co-optation. Movements are absorbed into market cycles or rebranded into brands. Radical moral energy becomes a product line. The system digests oxygen until protests become PR. For those who notice, the first act is naming. To map the instruments of design is to strip them of inevitability. Naming turns bafflement into strategy and opens a space where alternatives can be imagined and built. But naming alone is not enough. Awareness must be paired with institution building. Schools of dissent, protected commons, alternative infrastructures. Otherwise, insight becomes isolated and easily marginalized. Knowledge without leverage dissipates. The quiet architecture of social control depends on consent manufactured by habit, not on visible coercion. Break the habit, and you destabilize the machine. Habits are the fulcrum. Change them, and the rest shifts toward contingency. What you never noticed is that freedom and control are not opposites in blunt conflict but braided partners in modern life. Control often cloaks itself in the language and rituals of freedom, making it invisible to anyone who accepts the surface without probing the seams. Control sustains itself not by crushing freedom, but by scripting it. You are free, but only within corridors already mapped out by someone else. The corridor feels wide enough to walk, but its walls are designed to keep you from wandering too far. What makes this system terrifying is its subtlety. Chains are not visible because they no longer need to be. Chains of perception are stronger than chains of iron. If people accept the walls of their mental prison, the guards can disappear. The most brilliant move of control is convincing you that you are already free. The illusion of autonomy paralyzes dissent. After all, why rebel when you believe you are sovereign, when the cage has been painted with the colors of liberty? Look closely at how freedoms are framed. You are told you can speak, but only in spaces already monitored. You are told you can choose, but only from pre-approved options. This is not liberty. It is a performance, a masquerade of control. Social media is the prime example. It offers platforms to express yourself, but in reality, every word, every picture, every connection is harvested, analyzed, and repurposed. Your identity becomes a data set, your voice an input in someone else's algorithm. When dissent arises, it is not always crushed. Often, it is redirected. Outrage is funneled into controlled debates, endless arguments that burn energy without ever altering the structure. Noise replaces impact, and rebellion is consumed as entertainment. Control loves fragmentation. If people are divided into tribes, they cannot unite against the system. Disagreement is encouraged, polarization manufactured, and identity politics weaponized. Divide and rule remains as effective in the digital age as it was in empires past. Economic pressure seals the trap. When people are burdened with debt, endless bills, and job insecurity, their ability to resist collapses. Survival consumes energy that might otherwise feed rebellion. Poverty is not an accident. It is a tool. Notice how the definition of a good citizen always aligns with the needs of power. Productive, compliant, consuming, obedient. These traits are rewarded, while questioning, doubting, or resisting are pathologized. The social contract is rewritten as obedience disguised as virtue. The media system is central to this design. Stories are carefully chosen not just to inform, but to shape emotional climates. Fear, outrage, and distraction are injected daily, keeping populations reactive and unable to focus on deeper structures of control. Consider how often the word freedom is repeated in political speeches. It becomes a mantra, but each repetition dilutes its meaning. Words repeated without definition turn into symbols, and symbols are easy to weaponize. Meanwhile, silence surrounds the mechanisms of power. You will not see nightly broadcasts dissecting how lobbying reshapes laws, how corporations capture regulators, or how surveillance grows unchecked. These shadows remain unlit for a reason. The academic system plays its role as well. While knowledge is abundant, it is fragmented and siloed. Specialists know everything about one corner but nothing about the whole picture. That fragmentation makes systemic critique rare, even among the educated. Technology, once a tool of liberation, now doubles as a leash. It tracks, guides, and predicts human behavior with astonishing precision. What was sold as progress became the infrastructure of obedience, built one app at a time. Even leisure is scripted. Entertainment saturates minds with prepackaged stories, shaping emotional landscapes that normalize control. The hero always defends the system. The villain always challenges it. Culture becomes a rehearsal for consent. The machine ensures that even rebellion feels contained. Protest is allowed but fenced off. Movements rise and are immediately commodified into slogans, hashtags, and merchandise. The system absorbs resistance like water soaking into dry soil. Fear is the universal solvent. Whenever populations question too much, a new crisis appears. War, disease, terrorism, instability, always at the right moment. Fear forces people to cling to authority, to trade autonomy for protection. Yet, the most insidious weapon is not fear, but fatigue. Endless struggle, endless distraction, endless noise wear people down. Exhaustion makes passivity seem like relief, and silence like safety. Fatigue is engineered as effectively as fear, but within this suffocating web lies a truth. No system is eternal. History is littered with collapsed empires, broken tyrannies, and shattered illusions. What seemed indestructible always fell when belief in it dissolved. Power exists only as long as people accept it. Freedom, then, begins not with permission, but with perception. To see the structure is the first act of liberation. Once you name the invisible walls, the corridors shrink. Awareness cracks the cement, and cracks spread faster than chains can hold. The reason this teaching feels forbidden is because it places responsibility back in your hands. No institution can grant you freedom if your mind is colonized by control. True freedom is not given, it is taken. And once taken, it can spread. Every system of control fears awakening. They can handle rebellion, they can handle anger, but they cannot handle masses of people who refuse to play the script. Awakening dissolves illusions, and illusions are the foundation of control. This is why education discourages questioning. This is why media distracts. This is why crises are manufactured. Because the greatest threat is not violence, it is consciousness. To awaken is to dismantle the machine without touching a single lever. You must understand. They do not fear your weapons, your protests, or your slogans. They fear your mind when it sees clearly. A clear mind cannot be manipulated, cannot be bought, cannot be steered like cattle. A clear mind is the beginning of collapse. So ask yourself, how much of what you call freedom is just permission disguised as choice? How many of your desires are scripted by algorithms? How much of your obedience has been painted with the colors of virtue? These questions are the cracks in the wall. The dirty secret is that freedom has always been inverted. The more you consume, the more controlled you are. The more you submit to convenience, the more surveillance grows. Freedom is not found in permission, but in refusal. And refusal is contagious. One person questioning ignites another. One refusal spreads into 10, into hundreds, into millions. Power cannot contain awakening when it spreads like wildfire because its fuel, belief, burns away. If you have followed me this far, you are already different from most. You see the shadows others ignore. You hear the silence beneath the noise. You are awake enough to realize the game exists, and that alone makes you dangerous to it. Now comes the choice. Do you retreat into comfort, or do you step further into awareness? Do you cling to illusions, or do you join those who strip them away? Freedom is not a gift waiting to be handed to you. It is a path waiting to be walked. If you are ready, then do not walk alone. Subscribe to this channel, join this movement, and add your voice to those who refuse to live inside illusions. Together, we break the script. Together, we awaken. Because the more who awaken, the faster the illusions fall. And when the illusions fall, freedom is no longer what you were permitted to have. It is what you claim for yourself.